In the second part of this lesson, we're going to learn something called the Pythagorean converse. Okay, we explored in the previous video that we have a right triangle, and that if we locate the hypotenuse, right, and this would become the hypotenuse right here, okay, and we could use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So basically, what we know is that if c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared, this only works for right triangles. Okay? That only works for right triangles. So what we want to talk about in this section is, well, what happens if this does not equal? What if c squared is bigger than a squared plus b squared? Okay? Or what happens if c squared is smaller than a squared plus b squared? Then what do we do? Okay? What happens? Okay? So that's what we're going to explore today, is what happens if this is not equal. If it's not equal, then it can't be a right triangle. Then what is it? Okay? Right? So if we looked at this example here and we set it up, right, this would be C, because the hypotenuse is always C. Okay? So we would have, that would be C, so we'd have 12 squared equals, and then that means the other ones must be A and B, okay? 9 squared plus 7 squared. This is 81. This is 49. Okay? So this comes out to be 130 if I add all that together. Let's explore what happens on the other side of the equal sign. 12 to the second power is 144. Okay, 144 does not equal 130. It's bigger than 130, so it would be whatever happens here. So it's not a right triangle. This is not 90 degrees. Okay? So it's not a right triangle. What kind of triangle is it? I don't know. Let's figure out how to do that, okay? So let's look at our next paper here. So here finishes our, what we were just talking about, okay? When we have a right triangle, they're equal, okay? If C happens to be smaller, if C squared is smaller than the rest of it, that's an acute triangle. If C squared is bigger than the other two, it's an obtuse triangle. Okay, so you need to write these three down. This is what happens. If it's not a right triangle, if it's not equal, then it's got to be one of these two. Okay, and so this is our little chart. We're just going to see what C squared is, and we're going to compare it to the other two to decide what kind of triangle it is. Okay, remember, C is always going to be the longest side. Okay, C is always going to be called the longest side on the picture. Okay. So what I'm going to encourage us to do for our problems here is set all our problems up in kind of like a little table, okay? So I'm going to have you make a chart for each of our problems, and it's going to look like this. It's going to have C squared over here, and it's going to have A squared plus B squared over here, okay? So you're going to have A squared plus B squared, and then I want you to draw a little chart where you can put your symbols in here, okay? So this side's always going to be the C squared. This is going to be C squared, C squared, C squared. Okay? And over here is always going to be your A squared plus B squared. And what we need to do is that eventually figure out the numbers and decide, are they equal? Is one smaller or is one larger? Okay, so if they're equal, we'll call it a right triangle. If C is smaller, we have a smaller angle, which is an acute triangle. If C is bigger, then we have a bigger angle, and that means obtuse. Okay, so this is how we're going to set up this little chart to solve our problems. Okay, so let's look at this. Oh my gosh, they didn't give us a picture. That's okay, because we're smart people here, okay? So let's just start at the beginning. C squared, oops, let me redo that and use something not quite so heavy. C squared, A squared, B squared. I'm going to make my little chart. Okay, now let's look at our numbers. 3, 7, 9. The biggest one is always your C number. So your C is going to be 9 squared. It's the biggest number. The other two are your A and your B. So this is 9 plus 49, which is 58. Okay, over on the other side, this is 81. So we're comparing 81 to 58. 81 is bigger than 58. So C squared is larger, so this is an obtuse triangle. Not a right triangle, an obtuse triangle. Okay? All right, let's try another one. Set up our chart. Okay, let's look at our numbers. These are equally big, okay? They're the biggest, so just pick one of them to become C. Okay, so we'll make that one into our C, which means the other two are A and B. Okay, so this is 16 plus 256, which is 272. And on the other side, we have 256. Okay? So if we're comparing those two numbers, 272 is larger than 256. So C squared is smaller. It's the small side of the arrow here. So this is acute. Acute triangle. Okay. All right. Ooh, these are different. Look at that. How do I know which one's biggest? Right? How do I know which one's biggest? So what I can do to decide which one's biggest, okay, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I should slow down. Okay, so let me back up and do what you should do. You should set up your chart. Okay, set up your chart. Then go deal with the numbers. Okay, so all I'm going to do is use my calculator. So this is a 9. This is about 10.5, and this is about 11.8. I'm just going to use this to decide which one's biggest. So this one is definitely bigger, right? So I'm not going to use the decimal. I'm going to use the square root, but I just use the decimals for a quick check. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Second power. Which means the other two are my A and my B. So this is 81 plus, remember, square and a square root cancel, so I'm just left with 110, right? Square and square root, those cancel each other, and I have 110, okay? So it's 191. On the other side, square and square root cancel, so I'm left with 140. When I compare these two, 140 is smaller, so C squared is smaller, so it's acute. It's a cute triangle. Okay? Let's do one more just for comparison here. Okay, so we're going to set up our chart. Sorry, you grabbed the wrong pen. Okay, so we're going to set up our chart. And we're going to go check out our numbers. So I'm going to plug that into a calculator. It's about 8.5. That's a 7. That's an 11. This is the biggest one. So that is my C. The other two become my A and B. So I'm going to do 6 square root of 2 squared. I'm going to use parentheses because there's a lot going on here, okay? So I'm going to use parentheses to help clear that up. Okay? Do not plug this in your calculator without parentheses. You will get a mistake. Okay? This becomes 72 plus 49, which is 121. And then I'm going to square 11. 11 times 11 is 121. So I'm comparing these, they're equal, so it's a right triangle. Okay. So that is what we are doing with the converse. Okay? That is how we figure out the Pythagorean converse.